Imagine being disowned by your parents at 19 only to inherit a 1.9 million mountain lodge from your grandmother years later. Suddenly, the very people who left you behind are knocking at your door, claiming they've changed. But what would you do when the fortune they want comes with secrets, traps, and a chance for revenge? Watch as I turn the tables on the parents who thought they could walk back into my life. When I turned 25, life felt strangely predictable. I spent most of my days surrounded by the familiar scent of old books in the small bookstore where I worked, and my nights were quiet, spent alone in a cramped apartment filled with paintings I never had the courage to show anyone. My world was small, safe, and comfortable in its own lonely way, until the day a letter arrived that would completely upend everything I thought I knew about my life and my family. It came in a thick envelope, the kind of envelope you didn't get in the mail, unless it carried something important, and the handwriting on it was familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. It was my grandmother's. She had passed away 2 months earlier, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, leaving behind memories that were both warm and bitter. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, not in any tangible form, yet here was a letter with her unmistakable scrawl, addressed to me, her granddaughter who had been estranged from the family for so many years. As I tore open the envelope, my fingers trembled. Inside, there was a thick stack of papers, and atop them was a letter that began simply, "My dearest, you have always been the one who understands the heart, even when it is hidden from others." My eyes filled with tears almost immediately. It felt as though her voice had returned from the past to speak to me, to reach across the void of absence and remind me that I mattered. But as I read on, my initial warmth turned into disbelief. The letter revealed that she had left me her mountain lodge in Colorado, a massive property tucked away among the pine forests and snow-capped peaks, worth an astonishing 1.9 million. My hands shook as I reread the words, making sure I hadn't misread them. She had left me something extraordinary, a place she had poured her heart into for decades, a sanctuary she had always hoped someone in the family would truly appreciate. And somehow, that someone was me. I sank into my chair, overwhelmed. I had grown up with stories of her adventures in that lodge, tales of snowstorms that trapped visitors for days and summer nights when the mountains glowed in a way that seemed almost magical. I remembered the summers I had spent there as a child, running through the woods, helping her feed the horses, and curling up next to the fireplace as she told stories of family secrets and lessons learned. But life had not been kind, and when I was 19, everything changed. My parents, furious over my decision to pursue art instead of medicine, had disowned me completely. They had packed their lives neatly away from me, leaving no room for apologies, for understanding, or for love. I hadn't spoken to them since, and their absence had left scars I tried not to acknowledge, but that throbbed every time a family gathering or holiday passed without them. And now, just as I was beginning to feel excitement at this sudden inheritance, those old wounds were reopened in a way I hadn't anticipated. It didn't take long for the calls to start. Within a week, my parents had somehow learned about the inheritance. Their voices on the phone were unusually warm, filled with phrases like, "We're so proud of you," and "We'd love to celebrate together." I could hear the underlying tone, though, the same tone they had always used, the one that made it clear they were more interested in appearances than in me. The sudden change in them was jarring. After years of neglect, after countless birthdays, graduations, and milestones they had ignored, they were back, speaking to me as though nothing had ever happened. The timing was suspicious, and deep down I knew this wasn't about reconciling. It was about the lodge. about the fortune they had never expected to see me inherit. I sat with the letter for hours, rereading each line, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had been left to me. My grandmother's words were filled with love, encouragement, and a quiet pride in my resilience. She had seen the struggles I endured after being cast out, and she had made a choice to reward the strength I had shown in building a life despite that. She had also left me instructions, subtle but clear, about how she hoped I would live in the lodge and care for it. There were mentions of preserving its history, of welcoming those who appreciated the beauty of the mountains, and of protecting the lodge from those who might exploit it. It was a responsibility, yes, but also a gift, a chance to own something that represented both my grandmother's legacy and my own future. As night fell, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: joy, disbelief, anxiety, and a lingering bitterness toward my parents. I couldn't decide whether to be excited about visiting the lodge or wary of what their sudden reappearance might mean. Memories of arguments, cold stares, and harsh words floated through my mind, mixing with visions of snowy peaks and the warm glow of the lodge's fireplace. I thought about the phone call I had ignored that afternoon, the one from my mother, trying to mask her greed with feigned affection. I wondered what it would be like to see them again, in the shadow of my grandmother's gift. Would I feel vindicated, seeing them humbled by the reality of my inheritance, or would old insecurities and pain rise up to ruin everything? Even as I pondered these questions, a strange sense of destiny settled over me. It was as if this inheritance was not just a reward, but a test, a way for me to confront the past while stepping into a life I had never imagined possible. My grandmother had believed in me when no one else did, and in her final act, she had placed the power to reclaim my future firmly in my hands. The journey to the mountain lodge was unlike anything I had experienced before. As I drove through winding roads lined with towering pine trees, a thin layer of snow blanketed the landscape, sparkling in the late afternoon sun. The higher I climbed, the more the air smelled of fresh pine and winter cold, a scent that carried memories I hadn't realized I missed so desperately. I hadn't been back since I was a child, the last time my grandmother had taken me on a summer visit, before everything had fallen apart with my parents. Now, at 25, I was returning not as a guest, but as the owner of this magnificent property. The lodge itself began to appear over a bend in the road, nestled in a valley with the mountains rising sharply behind it, its wooden beams and stone facade glowing warmly against the cool landscape. It was exactly as I remembered, and yet it felt different, as if the lodge had been waiting for me to claim it. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed the details that I had overlooked as a child. The intricate carvings along the balcony, the rows of colorful wildflowers my grandmother had planted that had somehow survived the winter, and the large windows that reflected the snow-covered peaks. I stepped out of the car and let the cold air fill my lungs. It was crisp, sharp, and alive, and it made me feel both anxious and exhilarated. The lodge was quiet, but there was a presence there, something intangible that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. As I pushed open the front door, the smell of aged wood, cedar, and old fireplaces enveloped me. The interior was exactly as I remembered it, cozy yet grand, with high ceilings, a massive stone fireplace, and furniture that had been lovingly maintained over decades. Every corner of the lodge whispered stories of laughter, family gatherings, and quiet nights spent under the stars. I spent the first few hours walking through the lodge slowly, taking it all in. Each room held a memory. The kitchen had the same old wooden table where my grandmother had once taught me how to make her famous apple pie, and the living room still had the rocking chair where she would sit and read aloud to me, her voice gentle and soothing. Upstairs, the bedrooms were untouched, filled with antique furniture and quilts that smelled faintly of lavender. I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and pride. This was not just a building, it was a legacy, a physical embodiment of my grandmother's life and love. But as the initial excitement began to settle, a subtle unease crept in. The lodge was beautiful, but it also felt almost too quiet, too perfect, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. It was then that I noticed something tucked behind the fireplace in the living room. A small, dusty journal with a leather cover. I pulled it out carefully, intrigued. The journal was my grandmother's, and as I opened it, I discovered a world I had never known. She had written extensively about her life, her struggles, and her family, but also about secrets that had been kept for decades. There were mentions of hidden rooms within the lodge, of treasures that were more than just material wealth, and warnings about people who could not be trusted. My fingers traced the words carefully. Trust no one with the lodge but yourself. Some hearts are easily swayed by greed. I felt a chill run down my spine. My grandmother had always been wise, but I hadn't realized just how much she had prepared for the future, for me, and for the possibility that my inheritance might attract unwanted attention. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wooden floors, I continued exploring, finding small details that spoke of my grandmother's care and thoughtfulness. The library was lined with books she had collected over a lifetime, each with her notes in the margins, small reflections about life, art, and the importance of staying true to oneself. I lingered in the study, examining maps and letters she had kept from her travels, imagining the life she had lived, the adventures she had had, and the wisdom she had accumulated. Every discovery made me feel closer to her, as if her presence lingered in the lodge, guiding me through the corridors of her home. Night fell, and the lodge transformed under the glow of the fireplace and the dim lights I had turned on. Shadows danced across the walls, and the silence felt heavier, almost as though the building itself were alive. I realized that the lodge was not just a home, but a test, a sanctuary, and a puzzle in one. The more I explored, the more I understood that my grandmother had left me not only a property, but also a challenge. She had trusted me to uncover its secrets, to protect its treasures, and to navigate the complexities of the family I had once known. As I held the journal in my hands, I felt a determination I hadn't felt in years. This inheritance was not simply a gift of wealth. It was a responsibility, a legacy, and a chance to step fully into a life I had never dared to imagine. I settled into the master bedroom for the night, the journal beside me, and listened to the wind outside as it whispered through the trees. I thought about the call I had ignored from my parents, the ones who had abandoned me at 19, and how the lodge might soon become a stage for something far bigger than I had anticipated. There was excitement, yes, but also caution. My grandmother's words, her foresight, and the quiet power of the lodge itself made it clear that my life was about to change in ways I could not yet predict, and that the story of this inheritance was only just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since I arrived at the lodge, and in that time, I had begun to feel a sense of ownership and comfort I hadn't known I could feel. I had explored every corner, discovered hidden nooks, and even started arranging the spaces in my own way, making the lodge feel more like home than a museum of my grandmother's life. The mountains outside seemed to watch over me, their silent presence a reminder that I was now part of something timeless and unyielding, just like the property itself. Yet, despite the serenity, a shadow lingered in my mind. The inevitable confrontation with my parents, who I knew were aware of the inheritance and who had been reaching out in increasingly persistent ways. Their sudden attempts at communication were impossible to ignore, and I could feel the weight of what was coming before it even arrived. Then, on a crisp morning, the phone rang. I recognized the number immediately, though I almost didn't answer. When I did, their voices filled my ears. Bright, cheerful, filled with fox excitement, as if nothing had ever happened between us. My parents had returned to my life, claiming they had changed, that they regretted the years they had abandoned me, and that they wanted to reconnect. The words felt hollow, their warmth forced, and yet they were persuasive in a way that made it hard not to remember the family I had lost. Their timing was perfect, or at least they thought it was, as though the moment of my triumph, the inheritance of the lodge, was the perfect opportunity for them to slip back into my life. My stomach twisted with anger, but I kept my voice calm, polite, and neutral, hiding the storm that raged inside me. When they finally arrived, I could see the transformation in them, or at least the one they wanted me to believe. Their eyes sparkled with feigned pride and joy. Their smiles practiced, their gestures exaggerated as they looked around the lodge. They were impressed, almost too impressed. With the grandeur of the property, with the view of the mountains, the warmth of the fireplace, and the history that lingered in every corner. I walked them through the main hall, showing them the library, the study, and the large open living area, all the while noting the subtle glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. It didn't take long for me to recognize that they weren't here for reconciliation, or for shared memories, or even for the chance to connect. They were here for the lodge, for the wealth it represented, and they believed that their charm and familial bond might be enough to sway me into letting them claim a part of it. I kept my composure, greeting their questions with carefully measured responses, offering small glimpses of information while withholding the details that mattered most. They asked about the lodge's finances, the insurance policies, and even whether my grandmother had left specific instructions regarding inheritance. Each question, though polite on the surface, carried an undertone of greed, a probing for weaknesses I had no intention of revealing. I smiled and nodded, offering vague answers, while secretly cataloging everything they said and did, noting every assumption, every attempt to manipulate me. I realized that the journal I had found behind the fireplace, with its warnings to trust no one, had been right all along. My grandmother had foreseen this moment, had predicted the arrival of opportunists, and had prepared me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Over the next few days, their presence became almost suffocating. They explored the property as if they owned it, touching antiques, opening drawers, and commenting on potential improvements. I allowed it, knowing that my silence and patience would serve me better than any confrontation. I watched their reactions, studied their behavior, and began to craft a plan. If they truly believed they could manipulate me, that they could slip back into my life and claim what was mine by deceit or charm, they were gravely mistaken. I had inherited more than just a lodge. I had inherited wisdom, insight, and the lessons my grandmother had instilled in me over the years. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I found myself standing in the great hall, watching my parents examine an antique cabinet filled with old photographs and jewelry. They laughed together, sharing memories of my grandmother, speaking as though they had always been present in my life. The sight made my blood boil, but I restrained myself, reminding myself that my grandmother had entrusted me with more than just the lodge. She had entrusted me with the power to protect her legacy and to teach those who had wronged me a lesson they would not forget. That night, after they had gone to their guest rooms, I sat alone by the fireplace, the journal open on my lap. My grandmother's words seemed louder in the quiet of the lodge, her handwriting almost a whisper guiding me. Patience is your greatest weapon. Observe, plan, and wait. Those who come for your inheritance will reveal their true selves. I reflected on everything that had happened. Their sudden return, their subtle manipulations, their assumptions about my naivety, and realized that I was not the same person who had been left behind at 19. I was stronger, wiser, and more deliberate. The next morning, I explored the lodge again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. I examined hidden compartments, secret locks, and rooms I had yet to fully understand. My grandmother had left more than just a building. She had left puzzles, clues, and safeguards designed to protect her treasure from those who would misuse it. And now, with my parents on the property, unaware of the lodge's secrets and overconfident in their perceived control, I had an opportunity to use her foresight to my advantage. Their greed and arrogance had made them predictable, and I was ready to turn the situation to my favor. As I moved, the next step was careful observation and planning. My parents, of course, had no idea such a clause existed. They continued to act as though their charm and familial connection would be enough to sway me, completely unaware that every step they took could trigger consequences they hadn't imagined. I began subtly steering conversations toward the lodge's hidden features, mentioning the vault my grandmother had built, a secret room supposedly containing valuable antiques and treasures collected over her lifetime. I could see their eyes light up with curiosity, their voices laced with excitement, and I knew they were eager to see what lay beyond those doors. They didn't know that the vault was more than just a room. It was part of my grandmother's elaborate plan to test anyone who attempted to manipulate her inheritance. Over the next few days, I carefully laid the groundwork. I would invite them to the vault, making it seem as though I was sharing a special family secret. I allowed them glimpses of the lodge's documents, casually mentioning that my grandmother had left priceless items for the rightful heir. They were thrilled, completely convinced that they could charm their way into access, that their smiles and fabricated remorse would be enough to gain entry. Meanwhile, I made sure that I was in complete control of the logistics. Only I knew the exact location of the keys, the mechanisms that locked the vault, and the instructions that would activate the lodge's security measures. My grandmother had thought of everything: hidden cameras, automatic locks, and even a recorded message warning intruders to leave. I felt a thrill at the thought that I was about to wield the power she had entrusted to me so skillfully. The day came when I led them through the grand hallway, past the fireplace and library, and down a narrow passage that most visitors would never notice. I spoke casually, keeping my tone light, as if we were simply exploring family history together. "This is one of my grandmother's favorite places," I said, gesturing toward a door partially hidden behind an ornate rug. "She kept some of her most valuable things in here. She trusted me to care for them, but I thought you might like to see what she loved most." Their faces lit up with anticipation, eyes wide, hands reaching out to touch the doorframe, as though they could already feel the treasures beyond. I watched them closely, noting their greed, their impatience, the way they whispered to each other, as though plotting how to claim it all for themselves. As I unlocked the door and led them inside, I maintained a calm exterior, hiding my excitement. This was the moment my grandmother had prepared for, the moment I would take control and ensure that her wisdom and my rightful inheritance remained protected. The vault was dimly lit, filled with antiques, paintings, and rare artifacts collected over decades, each item carefully cataloged and maintained. My parents' eyes sparkled, and I could see their minds racing, imagining how they might leverage these treasures for themselves. I let them linger, pointing out the intricate details of the pieces, allowing their anticipation and greed to build. Then, at the precise moment, I triggered the security system. The lights flickered, locks clicked shut, and a recorded voice, my grandmother's own voice, preserved in an old tape, boomed through the room. Only the rightful heir may enter. Those who come for greed will find nothing but doors closed against them. My parents froze, their excitement replaced by panic and disbelief. Their hands grasped at the locks, trying to open doors that would not budge, their eyes darting around the room, realizing far too late that their assumptions and arrogance had led them straight into a trap. I stood at the entrance, calm and composed, watching the frustration and fear spread across their faces. For years, they had underestimated me, assuming I was naively weak or easily manipulated. Now, their greed had betrayed them, and the protections my grandmother had put in place were doing their work flawlessly. The vault was not just a room filled with treasures. It was a lesson, a demonstration of the consequences of attempting to exploit what did not belong to them, and a testament to the foresight and wisdom of the woman who had left me the lodge. The morning after the vault incident, the lodge felt different, almost electric, as though the building itself had recognized the shift in power. I wandered through the corridors, feeling the familiar creak of the wooden floors beneath my feet, the faint scent of cedar and aged pine mingling with the crisp mountain air seeping through the windows. My parents had retreated to their guest rooms, muttering under their breath, slamming doors, and occasionally shouting in frustration when their attempts to bypass the locks failed. From the warmth of the living room, I could hear them pacing and arguing, each moment reinforcing the realization that their greed had blinded them to reality. For the first time in years, I felt calm. My grandmother had not only left me a lodge, but also the means to protect it, and to assert justice in a way that I had never imagined possible. I spent the day organizing the lodge, checking the security mechanisms, and reviewing the journal once more. My grandmother's words seemed even more alive now, as if she were beside me, guiding my decisions. She had left me more than just a property. She had left a framework for navigating people, for understanding human nature, and for protecting what was rightfully mine. I understood now that the inheritance had never been about the lodge alone. It was about resilience, patience, and the wisdom to outmaneuver those who sought to harm me. I had spent years rebuilding my life after being cast aside by the people who should have loved me unconditionally. By evening, I knew it was time to confront them directly. I called them into the main hall, where the warm glow of the fireplace illuminated the room. Their faces were a mixture of defiance, embarrassment, and lingering hope. They had tried to feign confidence, but the failed vault attempt had unsettled them, and I could see it in the tension of their shoulders, the slight trembling of their hands, the wary glances they exchanged as though silently questioning each other's judgment. I remained calm, my voice steady, as I spoke about the history of the lodge, my grandmother's foresight, and the responsibilities that came with such a legacy. I let each word sink in, watching them realize that charm, manipulation, and false remorse would not serve them here. I explained that the lodge was more than a building. It was a reflection of my grandmother's life, her values, and her trust. It was meant for someone who respected it, someone who understood the weight of family legacy, and someone who would honor her memory rather than exploit it. I reminded them that she had left clear instructions and legal safeguards to protect the property from those who sought it for selfish gain. As I spoke, I saw the panic deepen in their eyes. They began to grasp the reality that every step they had taken, every attempt to manipulate me, had failed. Their arrogance had made them predictable, and my grandmother's foresight, combined with my careful planning, had ensured that justice was served without me needing to resort to anger or confrontation. The conversation shifted as I revealed the specifics of the hidden clause in the will, the provision that nullified any claim they might have if they attempted to coerce or influence the rightful heir. Their expressions changed in stages, from disbelief to anger, from anger to a grudging acknowledgement that they had underestimated both my intelligence and my grandmother's foresight. I could hear the bitterness in their voices, the frustration that came from realizing that the inheritance they had so eagerly pursued was now forever out of their reach. Every question they had asked, every subtle attempt to glean information about the lodge, had only played into the very system my grandmother had designed, a system I was now executing with precision. Over the following days, my parents finally left the lodge, slamming the car doors behind them and leaving the property as abruptly as they had entered. Their departure was not triumphant or reconciliatory. It was frustrated, bitter, and filled with the silent acknowledgement that they had been outmaneuvered. I watched them go from the top of the balcony, feeling a mixture of relief and closure. It was as if the mountain peaks themselves had witnessed the justice that had unfolded, silent guardians of a legacy finally protected. With them gone, the lodge no longer felt tense or charged with conflict. It was calm, serene, and alive with possibility. I spent the next weeks restoring the lodge to my vision, arranging the rooms, exploring hidden compartments I had yet to discover, and hosting small gatherings of friends and fellow artists who shared my appreciation for the mountains, the quiet, and the beauty of history preserved. I realized that the lodge was not just a home or an inheritance, it was a canvas for life, a sanctuary for creativity, and a space where I could truly belong. I found joy in small things, lighting the fireplace on a snowy evening, opening the old library for quiet reading sessions, walking through the pine forest at dawn while the mist hung low over the ground. Every step, every decision, every moment felt imbued with the presence of my grandmother, her guidance and her trust continuing to shape my life in profound ways. I reflected on the journey from being a disowned 19-year-old to becoming the rightful owner and protector of the lodge. I understood that the inheritance had been more than money or property. It had been empowerment. I had not only claimed my grandmother's legacy, but I had also reclaimed my own agency, proving to myself that resilience, intelligence, and patience could overcome even the most calculated attempts at manipulation. The lodge had become a symbol of triumph, a testament to endurance, and a reminder that some victories are won not through confrontation, but through strategy, wisdom, and a deep understanding of human nature. As I settled into the master bedroom one night, the journal opened beside me, and the mountains glowing in the moonlight outside, I felt a profound sense of peace. The lodge was no longer just a building inherited from my grandmother. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a monument to the lessons of the past. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards, and every whisper of the wind through the pine trees seemed to affirm that the future I had longed for was finally within my grasp. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the lodge, the inheritance, and the lessons my grandmother left behind. This story isn't just about money or property. It's about resilience, patience, and standing up for what's right, even when those who hurt you try to come back. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected inheritance, family drama, and clever revenge, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And remember, sometimes the greatest treasures aren't just the ones you inherit. They're the lessons that guide you through life,